I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to counsellingskillsacademy.com.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken across the studio screen. How are you doing, Ken?
I'm exceptionally well, Rory. I'm delighted to be here, and both Rory and myself are delighted that you have joined us. This is the Counselling Tutor Podcast, and you've joined us at episode 223. We have 3 topics that we're going to be discussing today, starting off with our Counselling Foundations, those important foundations that underpin what we do as counsellors and psychotherapists. Today, we're going to be going back to the ego states of transactional analysis. It's an interesting topic, even if you're not a TA practitioner. So I'm looking forward to that one. Then we go into focus on self, where we recognize you're the beating heart of your practice. We need to look to ourselves and be okay within ourselves to be there for our clients. And today we're going to be looking at self-regulation within our sessions. And then we go into practice matters, where we dip our toe into that we may come across in the day-to-day running of a practice, or presentations we may have that may come into our practice room. And today, Rory, you met up with Beach-Campbell to speak about male survivors of sexual abuse. So we're going to hear all about that. But we're starting off with those foundations, Rory. Ego states, transactional analysis.
I know. The work of Eric Berne, of course, the very famous psychotherapist or psychologist who really took Freud's id, ego and superego, the child, the adult, and the super parents, if we want to be very simplistic about Freud's theory, and made another theory, developed another theory. And there's an interesting story around how the theory began. It was because Berne was trying to join the New York Institute of Psychotherapy, and he was rejected. And he went on, after having a lot of training and a lot of personal therapy, as was the case in those days, and he went on to develop his own theory, and he called it the pack ego model. And there's a functional and a structural model. But if we think about it in very simplistic terms, Ken, the idea is that through our day, we may find ourselves in 3 very, very distinct areas. We may find ourselves in the adult, as we are now, Ken. We may find ourselves in the child ego state, as I find myself when I get my cup of tea. And we may find ourselves in a parent ego state. And at this time, I'm looking after my wife, who's just had a small operation, and I'm driving her mad because I'm over caring. My wife's saying, "No, leave me alone. I'm all right." And it's amazing. I'm seeing all those ego states sort of play out. And of course, what he did was he developed a model of personality based around that. And he said that if we get stuck in any one of those ego states, if we're permanently in a child ego state or permanently in an adult, in a parent's ego state, we're liable to have miscommunication with people. I mean, I'm sure we've all may worked or met someone who was permanently childish, and it's kind of really frustrating every time you say something to someone. They go, "I'm not doing that. Why should I do that?" Like a toddler. And also, you may have worked with someone who kind of is a bit like a parent, wags the finger and tells you what to do. It's a fascinating theory, and one I think that anybody who studies it, even at a minimal level, will get immediately, Ken.
I like it, and so it's the PAC model as you kind of outlined there, Rory. So if you think of it as 3 circles, at the top, the one that's got P in it, and we're talking about parental ego state there, and then A just underneath it. So you've got top circle, middle one is A, and then the bottom one is C. So it's parent, adult, child in its most simplistic form. And the kind of theory suggests that none of these ego states are bad bad per se. They're just places that we might find ourselves in throughout a day, throughout a conversation. We can change from one ego state to another. As you said, Rory, you get your cup of tea and there's like a woohoo, that's child ego state. Woohoo, it's definitely a free child ego state. We find ourselves sometimes, like you say, maybe waggling the finger ourselves. And that it would be like a critical or a controlling parent ego state, and then there's also another side to the ego state of parent, and that is the nurturing, it's all going to be okay, everything's fine, like a nurturing parent might be to a child. And you mentioned, and this is where it's interesting for me, Rory, how these models really do play out. You mentioned you might come across somebody who might be in that childish ego state, and that can be quite frustrating. And I wonder what ego state that frustration might come from. Would it be a parental or would it be an adult state? And that's the thing, isn't it? Because we can kind of apply this model to ourselves and question ourselves where we find ourselves. I certainly jump through all of those ego states all the time. And I guess the model suggests that if we can kind of mediate to the adult ego state specifically, and the aim to be there as much as we can, but acknowledging the parent and acknowledging the child within ourselves, that it is there within that adult ego state that we have the, I guess, most down-to-earth conversations.
Absolutely. And I think it does speak to therapy. I think it doesn't matter what modality of therapy you're practicing, but clients want to meet an adult in the therapy room. And, sometimes I think having an understanding of that model, we may have had a very difficult morning before we see a client, or, it may be our birthday and we're terribly excited about our birthday. And we go into the therapy room. It's really important that we kind of think for self, what ego state am I in? Am I in an adult place? Is my client going to be seeing an adult, as opposed to someone who's an over-caring parent? Oh, it'll be all right. Oh, let me put my arm around you. It'll, oh, don't worry about it. Let me rub that better. Or a giddly child, or a recalcitrant child, a child who goes around going, well, I'm not doing that. And, so it speaks to that. And what I like about the PAC model is that Byrne himself invented it so it could be understood by everybody. Freud's work was very, very complex, but Byrne's work was meant so people could understand it, parent, adult and child. And it's always a joy when we teach that, when we taught that in the past, Ken, when we taught together. It was amazing how many times that people identified their own ego states,
yes,
but crucially worked out what ego states their partners or those people close to them were. And what can happen is you can get something called a complementary transaction. So if you've got, two people, they're partners, they may be married or they could be partners. Sometimes what's happened is one is the parent and one is the child. And we can sometimes see that play out. A trip around the supermarket recently, and I saw someone berating their partner like they were four. We don't have those biscuits, do we? Because there's too many calories. We have those biscuits, and the person kind of skulked and put the biscuits back and picked the biscuits up they should have done. And it would have been quite amusing if if the person who was doing the berating was an adult and the person who being told off was a child, but the person looked like they were 40. So it can go backwards and forwards forever. And some people find that's where there's difficulty in relationships, where one person is being the parent and the other's being the child. I suspect it plays out a lot in couples therapy.
Yeah,
I suspect it plays out there.
Yeah, very much so. And you're speaking about that being a complementary transaction. That complementary transaction can carry on indefinitely, where one person may find themselves playing predominantly in that maybe critical parent ego state, and maybe the other person in that relationship may be the adaptive child. Okay, I'm going to do what you say. I'm going to behave like you say. And we don't consciously think this. This is all playing out of our awareness. That's the thing with this. It's not that we know that we're there. And that can go on indefinitely. But what is not sustainable indefinitely is if a person is maybe in the critical parent ego state, well, I don't think you should have done it like that, you should have done it like this, and then the other person also goes into that critical parent ego state where they're going, well, I did it like this because and you can't tell me that because I did that. And that is not sustainable. And that's where you would have an explosion or a very volatile situation. You're not going to be able to stay in the same ego state for very long. And somebody's going to need to move either to an adaptive child, a free child ego state, or more healthily, and where we are kind of shown is the healthy place to go, into the adult ego state. So with the biscuits, it might be, well, we don't have those biscuits because, as you were saying, Rory, we'll go to the biscuits today. You can't have those biscuits because they're high calories and they've got too much butter in, and you know what that does to my tummy. And it might be, from an adaptive child perspective, oh, okay, we better not get these, then I'll put them back. Which ones do you want, adaptive child? Maybe the adult ego state might be, I hear you saying that, and that these are not a fit for you, but I actually quite like them. So how about I have them, you don't? Which ones would you like? And that would be going into an adult ego state.
Yes, absolutely. And then we have something called an ulterior transaction. And I could give you an example of this being played out. Many years ago, I went to buy a car, and I went to the car showroom and I selected the one I wanted. And the salesperson said to me, it's got alloy wheels. And I said, oh, very nice. And he said, he's got a Bluetooth stereo. And I said, oh, very nice. He said, he's got a leather steering wheel. And I thought, why is he keep talking about this? I can see it has wheels. I can see it's got a stereo. And I can see it has a steering wheel.
Yeah.
And he said, you know your car? And I said, yes. He said, it's got more brake horsepower than your car. And then it struck me. What he was trying to do was access my kind of child ego state. So that I go, oh, it's got a Bluetooth stereo and it's got alloy wheels and this. And of course, when you're in a child ego state, you don't make the best decisions. And that's what he was trying to do. And I think I got about 3,000 quid off that car by staying in the adult ego state. Yeah. I said, very nice. I'd like a discount. But that's an alternate. And for some people, they would have just got lost in that. They would have been playing with the radio and feeling the steering wheel and, you know, oh, look at these alloy wheels and low profile tires. And at that point, of course, when you're in a child ego state, you're not critically thinking. That's the whole point of the adult ego state. You're more able to critically evaluate. And I asked him, I said, is this a sales technique you taught? And he said, yes.
Yeah.
He was honest enough, because once I'd called him out on it, he said, yeah, we taught to do that for the reason that we don't want to give a discount.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I hear you giggling there, Rory, but it is a manipulation. It's really interesting as you're saying that, because I tell you what's coming up in me is a bit of a critical parenting. I want to go over to him and have a bit of a word with him about that, Rory.
Let me try and rip my friend off.
But it is, isn't it? It is a manipulation. Understanding the psychology and how we think and understanding these ego states, it can be used to kind of influence where somebody might be at. And like you're saying, you know, when you go, especially into what is called the free child ego state, the free child ego state, I best describe by going, wee! You're full of excitement. And there's a bubbliness within you, and we can all relate to that kind of feeling at some level. You're not really, I guess, making great decisions. I'm not saying you... what I'm trying to say is critical thinking. Your critical thinking skills are going to be a little bit less when you're going wee than they might be if you're going, okay, let me take this on balance. Yes, it's red. Yes, it's got more horsepower. Hold on a minute. Doesn't that mean it's going to use a bit more fuel and be more expensive to run? And there you're now kind of evaluating it from an adult perspective. But if there is that manipulation, and I know it's taught in sales, in sales and it's used in sales. I think being aware of it, there's another good reason to learn it. But we put ourselves there as well. You know, you might be reading reviews and doing the same kind of thing. You're interested in buying something, you're looking at the reviews and you're looking for the stuff that confirms your excitement for this product, and you get more and more excitement, and you think to yourself, where am I? What ego state am I in? And I recognize it within myself. I like hi-fi stuff, Rory. I love music, and I can spend eye-watering amounts of money on things that my wife doesn't think are such a good idea. But in the moment, I'm picturing myself listening to it, and I'm getting that child excitement within. I get the little butterflies and the little fizzy feeling, and I want to buy it. And what I've done is I've kind of set myself a rule that I have to sleep on it. I have to sleep on it so I can get out of that child ego state where I'm going to make the decision now because I want it now. Gimme. And I'm going to go to sleep. And so often when I wake up the next morning and I think about it, the first thing where I kind of, my mind hasn't had a chance to jump into an ego state, I kind of might look at it very differently indeed.
Yeah. And Byrne did say that a healthy personality went through all the ego states. And I want to kind of, if you like, finish on the parent ego state. We talked about the wagging finger parents, but also there's a nurturing parent. So that top pea circle that you described earlier on in the piece, Ken, it's split into two, and one is called a nurturing parent, and the other's called a controlling parent. There's different names for it, but the idea that we can have a nurturing side to our personality is really, really important. And today, for instance, I will go to that parent ego state after we've finished making this podcast, and I'll go for a walk. A little voice in me will say, right, Rory, come on, you need to get yourself some exercise. You need to look after yourself, mate. So have a walk around in the sun and, get some exercise and make sure you have, something healthy for lunch. So that part of us is very, very useful. It's when we're stuck in one place only, where we can't see it for ourselves and others can. And, sometimes it can be really, really hard to move into that adult, certainly if you've had a relationship in the past, an early childhood experience where you were not allowed to grow up. I think a lot of people who, have had very difficult parenting may end up with very distinct child ego states, because part of bringing a child up is moving them. And even as small children, I do it with my grandchildren. I get them to act in an adult way. In terms of ego states, I'll say, okay, we can have sausages today, or we can have, eggs today, but we can't have both, and that's an adult decision. And I think TA has far wider applications than just therapy. I think it can be, it's used in management, it's used in education to kind of ease and to make communication clearer. So it's a wonderful theory.
It is. Really, and I think we could talk about it all day, to be honest with you, because it goes very deep, and it's just those three little circles, which of course are divided up as well. But just to kind of close this off, when you're speaking about the adult ego state, so if you look at the picture of the P at the top, A in the middle, the adult, and the C, the child at the bottom, those three circles, when you're in the adult ego state, the theory suggests you have access to both the parent and the child ego states within the adult. It's not that they turn off and you're in a completely different place. You have access to the parent, you have access to the child. So when you're speaking about your going for a walk, Rory, it feels very much to me like you're in an adult ego state, and you're listening to the voice of the maybe nurturing parent saying, come on, you need to look after yourself, you need to go and have a bit of a walk. And it could well be that within you is also another little voice that goes, but I don't want to go for a walk today. I want to stay here, and I want to sit down, and I want to drink some tea. So we're listening to both of those ego states. But within the adult ego state, we go, okay, I know that I need to go for a walk, and I know that I want to sit here and have another cup of tea. But on balance, in looking at both the parent and the child ego states, I think I will go for that walk. And that's adult, where we're making that decision with being able to take both the adult, the parent and the child ego states into consideration. And I think, as you were kind of saying, when we go into maybe a parental ego state, we lose access. That's all we see. When we go into a child ego state, that's all we see. It's kind of becomes a blinkered place to be. So within the adult, we have access to all.
Yes, absolutely. And I don't know how you managed to see in my head. That's exactly the conversations I have, Ken.
But I knew it because there was the word tea in it, Rory.
Oh, well, there we have it. There we have it. But yeah, in terms of the process, I might be saying, well, I'll just have another cup of tea and I'll sit down now. And I sometimes hear this kind of voice saying, come on, we know we've got, like you would to a small child, come on, we know we've got to go for a walk. It's good for you. And you like walking and it's sunny outside. And you might see someone you can talk to. Come on, let's go for a walk. And that usually kind of, as you say, accesses the adult and says, yeah, that's the right thing to do. And off you go. But what I'd say to those people listening out there, listen to your own voices. Do a little bit of experiment over the next few days after listening to this and just see which voices are coming up for you. Is it an adult? Is it a child? Is it a parent? Very, very useful tool for personal development.
Helps to have a handout, and of course we have a handout for you. It's quite an in-depth handout. It is on the ego states. And how can you get that? Well, you can go to our website, which is counsellingtutor.com. Click on the podcast tab and go to episode 223. And right there, a beautifully written piece on the ego states with the model shown, with the history, speaking about Freud. And this is written by a very good friend of Counselling Tutor, Steve Wrigler, who put this together for us, who trained in TA and wrote this and did a little bit of work for us. So definitely go and get that. Counsellingtutor.com. Click on the podcast tab, episode 223. Get your handout. That's us. We're done with our Counselling Foundations. We now move on to that focus on self, recognizing you are the heartbeat of your practice. And we need to be okay to be there for our clients. And self-regulation, Rory, this is really important. And I think it really builds on what we've just spoken about in the ego states.
Yeah, it's a nice segue, isn't it, into this? And I think that, this is something that comes up in our Facebook group a lot. And if you're not a member of our Facebook group, type in Counselling Tutor into Facebook. You'll find us. We're a closed group. That's it. Type it in like that. Knock on the door. I'm doing a knocking sound for those watching on the video feed. Knock, knock, knock. Thank you, Ken. And our caring, wonderful moderation team will let you in. And you can join thousands of like-minded people talking about the world of counselling and psychotherapy. We have students, qualified colleagues. We have tutors, supervisors, lots of different people doing lots of different modalities and courses. But there are some common themes that come up. And a common theme is, what happens if I'm working with a client and all of a sudden I'm touched so deeply that I cannot regulate myself? Or what happens if I'm triggered? It brings up stuff from my past. And I think it's really, really important. It was a question I was recently asked. I gave an interview to a group of students, and it was a question that came up. And I said to the person, I said, first of all, I think it's about, making sure that you've had really good personal therapy. Because if there's still stuff around for you, it might be that personal therapy will allow you to process it and to be able to bracket it off. That's a term that's sometimes used, bracketing your own stuff off for the time you're in the therapy room with the client, and then you can unpack your own stuff when the client goes. And also, and I can't emphasize this enough, and somebody said the other week, I was talking to someone this week, and he said, you're always banging on about supervision, Rory. Mm-hmm. But I'm going to bang on about it again. It's a good Northern Manchester expression, that banging on. And I'm banging on about good supervision. A good supervisor will pick up if someone is struggling to regulate with a client and work with that and look where that's coming from. But it's really, really important if we're having difficulty regulating that we take action. We can't just let it pass because, we not to put too fine a point on it. We don't want two clients in the therapy room. We want someone who, as we've spoken to in the other piece, is in the adult place, who can regulate and hold the client, emotionally hold the client, so that they can get the help they need. But it doesn't negate the fact that some people have very difficult pasts, and that's why they become therapists. It can sometimes be a bit of a juggling act, Ken.
Yeah, it goes back to, reminds me of an episode we did on the wounded healer. You know, it's about examining what brought us into therapy and making sure we're okay. This is that focus on self section. I've said it many times, Rory. It's my favorite part of the podcast, because I think that the development and growth of self, so important in service of our clients and in service of ourselves. It's amazing what changes when we change. And I liked how you said bracket when you were saying, you know, so you sat there, you're in a session with a client, the client says something and something comes up for you. And that can be frustration, it can be anger, it can be any emotion, it can be sadness, it can be grief, it can key into loss, it can key into so much. What we don't want to do is swallow it. So if you think about when we're working with clients, we're trying to say, you know, share your emotions, let them out, let's look at them, acknowledge them. So swallowing them and gulp, ooh, lock that in a box is an area for concern within self. And I love the Carl Rogers quote where he speaks about that it is only when I truly accept myself as I am do I have an ability to change. And step one of that is seeing it and acknowledging that. Now, as you've quite rightly said, Rory, right there within that therapy room, that's not the time. We're there in a role to be there with a client. And like you said, you don't want two clients within the therapy room. So bracketing is a beautiful word. So what is bracketing? Bracketing is basically seeing it. So it comes up for us. We feel this emotion because it's going to be an emotional movement. There's a movement of energy within us. We see that, we recognize that, we acknowledge it just mentally. I see that within me. That's definitely something I'm going to look at. I see you. I'm just going to put you one side right here. Just put you one side while I carry on with this client. And if that keeps on recurring within that same session with that same client, it's the same process. Yes, I do see you. I see you kind of squeezing back in again. I see you. I recognize you. I'm just going to put you this one side, just one side, while we work with this client. So it's not I can't look at that now. I can't look at that now. I've got to be with this client. I've got to lock it in a box. I can't feel that. How can I feel that when I'm seeing a client? Acknowledge it. And then kind of put it one side to be looked at. When the client goes, you do your notes, and then you have a little bit of space to go, okay, all right, let's unpack this. Let's have a look at it. Let me process that. Let me write about it. Let me journal about it. Let me speak to a peer about what came up for me. Let me, of course, speak to my supervisor. And it can sometimes indicate that we need to go into our own personal therapy, Rory. It's a great indicator, that kind of stuff. Yeah. But not always. Sometimes it's just stuff that is passing through us, and it's okay to feel those feelings. I think that's important to put out there. It's okay to feel those feelings within the moment. It's not okay to let them overwhelm us in our job.
Yeah, and I'll give you an example. A good few years ago, I was working in a school as a child therapist, a school counsellor, and I can remember meeting a client and that happening to me, and I felt the term I used to my supervisor was I felt breached. Felt like my emotional door had been kicked in, and I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to have to bracket this off, take that feeling, acknowledge it, put it to one side, work with the client the best I can, because it was a real overwhelm. I was having to really struggle to get in the client's frame of reference. And then when the session ended, I made sure that I'd had an early supervision to look at this, because it was very unusual to feel the way I did. And really it was just a case of some transference. The client reminded me of someone in my life, and there seemed to be a more of an urgency with this client than with other clients, and it was just because they're, frankly, the person reminded me of my daughter, and as a consequence of that, I was okay with it, and it was a bit of a learning curve that even someone who taught transference on a weekly basis could experience it and be overwhelmed by it. And it's not a weakness. That's the other thing I'd say. part of being a compassionate therapist is that sometimes we do kind of come to the very line of our own emotions. It goes right to the line. But as Ken said, get some good supervision, bracket it off. And, if it persists, I think that's the time to visit your own personal therapy. Really is.
Definitely. I'm glad that you spoke about transference there. And we speak about transference often. And transference is invisible. You don't see it. You can be the transference lecturer of the world who studies only transference. You will still have invisible transference that plays out. That's the whole nature of transference. Once we've named it transference, it's no longer transferential because we can now see it. It is out of awareness. So I guess, Rory, when you're kind of speaking about that this person reminding you of your daughter was a process that you went through to be able to recognize that, see it as transference, and it does take some of the sting out of it when we recognize it. And transference doesn't show itself as transference, which shows itself as an emotion or a feeling that does not feel appropriate or a fit for the situation we're in. Now, we're speaking here about that self-regulation. We're speaking about emotions or feelings coming up for us within a client session. And the thing is, we work empathically and we work in emotion, and we're traveling down this road with a client. We're going to be empathically sharing that journey, and that's okay. We've spoken on previous episodes about maybe being moved to tears within a session from a client and what they're sharing. But within that, what makes that appropriate is that we are in the frame of reference of the client. And you said it so well, Rory, when you said, all of a sudden, I was no longer in the frame of reference of the client. And that is where we see it as, aha, this is not their stuff. This is my stuff that is falling in here. And I can certainly recognize it. I've felt anger. And I almost feel ashamed. If it hadn't been for the work that I did with my supervisor around this, I felt anger in a client session, somebody that I'm there for with this unconditional positive God, not judging who they are. And I felt anger from something that they said. It wasn't something that they said. It was a feeling that was triggered within me from my past because of something that they said. But that anger, I was almost reluctant to take it to supervision, Rory, because that's not what counsellors feel. And I think, us having this conversation, it is important because we do feel these things. They do come up, and it's about recognizing, seeing it, acknowledging it, and taking it and working on it, either with yourself through process or taking it to a supervisor, speaking to peers about it. That's what takes the power out of these. We are emotional beings, and our own lives do jump in every now and then. And that emotional regulation, as you said, Rory, I love the wording of this, bracket it. Just bracket it. Acknowledge it, see it, put it one side, say, I'm coming to you in a mo, I'm now in service.
Absolutely. I think you put it so eloquently. And I was smiling when you were talking about, talking about the supervisor saying, you may be the most experienced counselling tutor in the world, and you talk about transference on a regular basis, but when it happens to you, it's not easy to identify. Pretty much what my supervisor said to me. She kind of sat and she smiled as I was saying this, and I'm kind of saying, why can't I see it? And she said, well, how often have you told your students that you can't see it? And I'm like, well, yes, I do that. So why would it be different for you? Oh, fair enough, got me. But it does come up, and what I would say, and it's a bit of a plea, if it does happen, certainly early in practice, it can be very off-putting. It can bring up feelings of, can I do this? Am I in service? And what I would say is, it's good that that's coming up for you, but please get supervision. Yeah. Please talk to your tutor, chat with your peers. You'll find you're not the only person in the world who this happens to. And, I'm sure that in my practice life, it could happen again. I'm not immune to it, even though I've done, thousands of hours. You're just not immune to it, because transference is kind of sneaky. It's a kind of sneaky process. You just don't see it happening until it's actually happened.
Yeah. I mean, if we kind of grew out of it with thousands of hours, then we wouldn't need supervision anymore. We'd be superstars, and nobody is. Nobody is. And good supervision, so important. And as you said, Rory, we mentioned supervision again and again and again. And I wanted to put something in here. If you're a counsellor and you have got some experience, you've been around for some time, you have a maturity in your practice, and you're interested in training to become a counselling supervisor, then go and check out Counselling Tutor, because we do have supervision training. It is outstanding training. I'm not saying this because I think it's great. I'm saying this because this is the feedback that we get from those that take this training. And we run this training quarterly. So we have quarterly cohorts that start. And if you go to counsellingtutor.com, right there on the homepage is the information about the training that we offer. And you can join a waiting list. And then when that next cohort kind of starts, we invite you to an information session, and you can come and see if that training would be a good fit for you. That is our focus on self for today, Rory. And we now going in to practice matters, where we recognize that within practice we have many different, I guess, hats that we need to wear. One of those is client presentations, and I think that's a really important one. We do CPD so that we can inform ourselves, so that when we're working with a certain client presentation, we have information and we can go further and more in service of that client. You spoke with Del Beach-Campbell about male survivors of sexual abuse, Rory.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of discussion around female survivors of sexual abuse, and absolutely correctly. But sometimes the voices of male survivors of sexual abuse are sometimes not as prominent. And Del Beach-Campbell has done a fantastic lecture for the Counsellor CPD Library on working with male survivors of sexual abuse. And this is what he had to say.
Practice matters.
The National Counselling Society is proud to sponsor Practice Matters. National Counselling Society are really excited to have launched their Children and Young People Therapist Register for counsellors working with the younger age group. To find out more, visit nationalcounselingsociety.org. nationalcounselingsociety.org.
And we welcome Del Beach-Campbell, who's done an absolute fantastic and I think timely and important lecture on working with male survivors of sexual violence. So Del, very welcome.
Hi, nice to meet you, Rory.
Now, we hear a lot, and rightly so, about violence towards women. And it seems to be in the media, it seems to be in our practices. We hear it a lot. We don't hear that much about male survivors of sexual violence. It seems to be something that we don't hear a lot of. And my first question is that because there's less, or is that because it's something that just isn't in the awareness of, in the public consciousness?
I think the answer is probably a bit of both. Yes, it is true that statistically more females are the survivors or victims of sexual violence and sexual abuse than males. Having said that, some statistics even suggest that 1 in 6 men have suffered sort of unwanted sexual contact at some point in their lives. And also it's interesting at Survivors UK, where I work part-time and run group work programs for the male survivors of sexual violence and sexual abuse. They're sort of really the referrals are sort of more than ever before. But there's so much stigma around men coming forward. I think part of the problem is it's a little bit to do with the media. Unfortunately, most perpetrators of sexual violence are men, although not all. And therefore, the discussion around it tends to be about seeing men as the perpetrators, as the abusers, as the offenders, and not as the victims or survivors. But even with your talking about men being a minority, I don't think we live in a society where a minority should be overlooked. I think we've all moved forward from that. If we're talking about a minority where we're talking about thousands of guys and boys, then somehow we've got to change that culture. And I think part of the issue is, are men able to talk about their vulnerabilities, about abuse, about trauma? And it could be argued that women, without stereotyping, are perhaps better at doing that because of the society we live in. And if that is the case, what can we do about it?
Yes, and I think I'll pick up on your point about the fact that even though the types or the instances of abuse are less than women, it's still important. We mustn't overlook minorities, and we mustn't overlook the fact that this is a very, very real issue. So I guess my next question is, what is male sexual abuse? How might that present? How might someone know?
I think it's a really good question, because when I do the group work, so we often have about 10 to 15 guys. At the moment, of course, it's on Zoom, but we do it in person as well. And it's interesting in terms of what is sexual abuse, what is sexual violence, what is rape. There are legal definitions, but the interesting thing is the experiences of the guys in the room are varied quite a lot. So you'd get some guys normally in an average room where we're talking about childhood sexual abuse. And that could be typically from a family member, a friend of the family, or somebody that was trusted by the family, like, for example, a PE teacher or piano teacher, something like that, or somebody who is trusted by the school that they went to. So you get the victims of CSA, childhood sexual abuse. And then you also get guys who are survivors or victims of sexual violence as they got older. And their experiences, again, would be very, very varied. And it could be that and it's the same for anyone really, of any gender, that depending on those experiences of adult sexual violence, they might not want to come forward, because there's this sort of culture of like, what were you doing? For example, if somebody was out taking, drinking out with friends. Some guys we get would have had their drinks spiked. So all sorts of, we always say in the group, by the way, that there's no sort of hierarchy of abuse. So somebody who was unfortunately the victim of abuse over a sustained period of time, or maybe even the victim of grooming, their experience could be equally traumatic as somebody who had a one-off experience as an adult of sexual violence. So, and in terms of the word rape, now it is now a legal definition that men can be raped. But it is a word that some men don't use. It's to everyone, and it's also a bit like the word survivor and victim. Some people consider themselves, this is an awful thing to happen to me. I'm a victim of an appalling crime, and I'm still dealing with it now. Others think, it's part of them. It's an awful thing that happened to them, but it's made them the individual, the strong, compassionate, courageous individual they are, so they see themselves as a survivor. And you even get few that see themselves as thrivers, where they're actually feel they're sort of able to give to other people, become a spokesperson for survivors of sexual violence. But it's an interesting question, because even if you're a survivor yourself, what does it actually mean, and what does it feel like? And does it mean you're a victim? Or does it mean you've got baggage? Some guys come in, does that mean I'm sort of fatally flawed for the rest of my life? And the answer is no, it doesn't. No.
Yeah, so I'm gaining an insight here that it is it's about as much about individual perception as it is about the legal definitions, if you like. It's how people perceive it. Now, one question that I've always been interested in is, are the perpetrators on male sexual violence tend to be predominantly male, or are there female instigators of male sexual violence?
Yes, certainly. And then in the UK, statistics around this type of thing are quite hard to find. So it'd probably be a brilliant research project. And I think for when I do run a group work, as I say, if there's a dozen guys, usually by an average, there's at least one in that group where the perpetrator was female. Often, typically, but not exclusively, it could again been a female member of the family or a trusted person. like a childminder when they were young. It could be as well a female partner. But obviously, if the men are having problems coming forward, and they do, about disclosing male perpetrators, then to disclose a female perpetrator is even more difficult, even more challenging, there's even more stigma. Because we talk about things like the reactions of when you're a victim of, when you're experiencing sexual violence, of sort of fight, flight, freeze, flop, fear. But, as it said in my presentation, most of us, whatever gender we are, we don't fight back. We're, in those type of, we tend to flop, or we freeze, or we even befriend the perpetrator. And this is true of men too. But the additional problem that men have got is that they are society thinks, well, why didn't you fight back? And if the perpetrator was female, it's even more the case. Well, surely you could have defended yourself. So that's why I think it's even more of a taboo subject at the moment for guys to come forward.
Yes, and in terms of the male experience, is there the same misconception, the you were asking for it, you were being provocative type of attitudes that surround sexual violence in general?
Yeah, absolutely, it's the same. So it could be that if there are other factors involved, such as drugs or alcohol or socializing, or even what and women, of course, get this all the time, what you were wearing, what you were doing, were you provocative, were you flirtatious? Obviously, our survivors, in terms of sexuality, a complete cross-section, but some of the gay guys especially get this quite a lot, did you sort of lead them on, and that's really, because obviously sexual violence is around power more than anything else, which is sometimes it's not necessarily to do with any sort of sexual attraction between the perpetrator and the victim. So therefore, for men where the perpetrator is another man, it doesn't necessarily have an implication on the sexuality of either the victim or the perpetrator, if it is just about power and control.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really comprehensive answer, Del, and I think it does speak to the fact that no matter who is the victim, we use the term victim here, is that they should be taken seriously. This kind of outside influence of did you lead them on should be really dismissed. No is no, and that's the end of it, isn't it? Yeah. So as we come to the end of this interview, are there any kind of misconceptions or kind of fantasies, for want of a better word, that people have about male sexual violence?
Yeah, I think there's quite a few actually. I mean, they sort of hover around, and sometimes when we do a group work, they like to discuss them. So one of the things I've already said about is sexuality. So really, it's statistically true that if you're a survivor of sexual violence at a young age, it may be you're more likely to be a survivor again later on. So we've got some guys coming to us who've been experienced sexual violence on more than one occasion, and it could be because abusers, perpetrators single out the vulnerable. It isn't true to say that if you're a victim of sexual violence, you're likely to go on to become a perpetrator. That is a myth, and that's something that men especially fear. And it isn't true that being a survivor has an impact on your affects your sexuality. It doesn't make you gay or straight or bisexual, but it does have an impact on how you feel about your sexuality. I guess we've all got the right to enjoy our sexuality.
Yes.
And if you've been a victim of sexual violence, and that's the first sort of physical, almost intimate contact, if you call it that, you've had with someone, it's bound to have an impact, which is why we run groups, especially like speaking about sex as a survivor and building sort of positive relationships with people, not just partners or sexual relationships, but also friendships. The issue of trust comes up all the time. How can you then go on to trust other people? And how can you then go on to trust yourself if you feel you've made poor choices in the past? And of course, we remind people it wasn't your choice to be a victim of sexual violence. It was something that was imposed upon you. But it's that thing about people blaming themselves, people feeling guilt, and also people feeling shame. and dealing with things like shame, I feel the best way to respond to that is for men to talk. If there's a high suicide rate amongst men, highest, killer over between the ages of 25 and 35, men need to talk, and they need to feel that if they speak about sexual violence to their mates, or whoever, that they're going to be heard.
Yes.
And it shouldn't be a taboo subject.
Absolutely. And, you bring up those very poignant statistics regarding suicide, and male sexual violence does play into that. Finally, as we come to the end, for those who watch the lecture, Del, what do you hope they'll take away from it?
I'm hoping it will take away some of their preconceptions, and especially for practitioners, counsellors, therapists. I think it's really good to perhaps acknowledge that if a man comes forward to you and discloses what this has happened to him, it's a courageous thing to do. It's courageous and it's brave and it's strong for men to talk about their vulnerabilities and about their trauma. Because unfortunately, we're not quite there yet, I don't think, with society as a whole. So any man that wants to come forward and speak about this trauma that they may have lived with, it takes an average of 26 years for a guy to come forward to speak about sexual violence. So for a man or a boy to do so, that's an amazing first step. So hopefully they'll get that from the workshop.
Well, I mean, we've heard that message really loud and clear, Del, and thank you for amplifying it for those people out there. There's no shame in disclosing and gaining help. I've seen the lecture myself before it's been released, and I have to say it's a fantastic lecture. It's not to be missed. So, Del Beach-Campbell, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Rory. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you to Del Beach-Campbell. Thank you to you, Rory, for hosting that interview. And if you're interested in learning more about what Del was speaking about, male survivors of sexual abuse, you can see the entire lecture, and that is in the Counsellor CPD library. If you remember, log in. That lecture is there for you. If you're not a member of the Counselor CPD library, go to counsellingtutor.com. All the information of what the CPD library is and how to join is right there for you. This has been episode 223 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, Rory.
It has. And we started off with Counselling Foundations, talking about those ego states, the journey through parent, adult, and child. Then we moved on to focus on self, regulating yourself in the therapy room, and I unusually talked about transference, not that I usually talk about transference, and how to regulate and be kind to yourself should you find yourself struggling to regulate in the therapy room. And then finally, I think an important interview with Del Beach-Campbell, who talked about working with male survivors of sexual abuse. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.